So Manchester City have won a court case yesterday. Not the court case you're thinking of. This has nothing to do with the 115 charges. That is still going on, and it's going to be going on until I think early November sort of time. The original actual hearing will take 10 weeks, and then they will go away and deliberate and think of a verdict, and that verdict will come sometime early next year, sometime in February, I think, something like that is the kind of guess they're going for with this. Now, this is a different one. This is relating to sponsorships. Now, one of the things that Manchester City have been kind of alleged to do, and they're not the only ones to do this. In fact, there have been actually some cases sort of similar to this in the past when it comes to teams like Sheffield Wednesday, Aston Villa. Aston Villa ended up escaping that one because they got promoted to the Premier League, and Derby County was another one. Now they were having their Wednesday and County, that is, they will be investigated with theirs because of them selling their stadiums away and inflating the values of that stadium basically to try and generate more revenue, and they effectively sold it to the owner rather than it being for the club, and they inflated those values and they got found guilty, and I think both got points deductions in the end because of it. Manchester City's though is to do with sponsorships, and I'll spoil the verdict for you. Man City have won this case, and this could potentially set a very dangerous precedent. But as much as I criticise Man City, and I do get a lot of comments on my videos with Man City fans are extremely defensive and almost seem a little bit paranoid, to be honest with you, at times when it comes to these videos. Like, I've got nothing against your club, I just want to get my opinions out there at the end of the day. And when it comes to this, I do realise that it's actually a very difficult thing to quantify. So basically what the allegations are about, or were about I should say, because it's now been resolved, was that the sponsorships were being artificially inflated, allegedly, by Manchester City. So Manchester City are owned by the state of Abu Dhabi pretty much. And they're owned by a private company technically, but they're owned by Abu Dhabi, the UAE I should say. The name of the company is like Abu Dhabi Holdings or something like that. That's why I got mixed up with the name there. Not dissimilar to how effectively Newcastle United are owned by Saudi Arabia, how Paris Saint-Germain over in France are owned by Qatar. It's exactly the same kind of thing. And it's a very difficult thing because, and it's not unique to Man City, all these clubs do it pretty much, where their owners are sponsors of the club. You know, their companies are sponsors of the club. In Manchester City's case, things like Etihad Airways, the Etihad Stadium is where they play, and they usually have Etihad emblazoned on their shirts. Etihad going around the stadium. It's a major sponsor. Why wouldn't it be? It's a massive airline. It's one of the biggest companies in Abu Dhabi, in the UAE as well. So why would it not? Why would they not have that? There's nothing wrong with that. The questions though arose when it came to the actual amounts that were being used to sponsor these. So if you inflate the value of these sponsors, because you're effectively giving that sponsorship money to yourself, it's a company owned by the same group. So because of that, you can, in theory, I'm not saying Man City have done this, but in theory, this is what the allegations said, is that they artificially inflated these values in order to satisfy FFP and PSR. Sponsorship income is one of the incomes that goes towards FFP, PSR. The higher your sponsorships, the more money you can spend within the regulations. So in that sense, it was allegedly in Manchester City's interest to increase those sponsorships. But how do you define how much is appropriate for a sponsorship deal like this? Manchester City are now one of the biggest clubs in world football. There is no doubt about that. But the questions really arose more for when they were coming up, when they were trying to become one of these biggest clubs, and seeing things like the financial statistics coming out every season about Man City being the club that generates the most revenue in the world, and that very much raises eyebrows. It's like, well, yeah, they're a huge club, but are they a bigger club financially than Manchester United, than Liverpool, than Arsenal? Doubtful, I'll be honest. And again, Man City fans, you can come at me in the comments, I don't care, right? 20 years ago, you guys were nowhere compared to these clubs. You don't have that established long-time fan base. There are a lot of Man City fans now, but older generations, for the most part, will not support them from around the world because for a lot of that time, they weren't even in the Premier League. They weren't even in the top division. So why would they have that incredible support around the world? Yes, domestic support has always been there. They've always been a big club. They are one of the biggest clubs. Well, maybe not one of the biggest clubs in England in the past, but they are now. And that is really where it comes from. That's where the majority of their income came from. obviously these other clubs, as the Premier League became the global league of the world, the money league as it were, that's when the support for Manchester United, Liverpool, Arsenal, Chelsea, that's when it all came in. But Man City weren't a part of that until much later. So that's when dubious claims come. That's when the claims of, are they cooking the books? Are they fiddling the financials here? But in a court of law, they have been found not guilty. They have won their case. So that very much opens the floodgates potentially for other clubs to do the same and not have the fear of repercussions like this. Watch Newcastle United very, very carefully over these next few seasons because, and again, this is a legitimate criticism of FFP and one that I actually share. I feel like because of that, it is incredibly hard to financially break into that top 6 and make it a top 7, make it a top 8. Aston Villa and Newcastle are doing their very best. Villa are doing incredible on the pitch. Newcastle doing really well on the pitch too, but Newcastle really struggling to invest a lot more money in the squad because they don't have the revenue, they don't have the global footprint that even Manchester City have. It'll take decades for them to get that. That's just a fact of life, and that's even if they get the kind of success. They're not in Europe this season. They might be next season, they probably were, but they need to be regularly in the Champions League to have that kind of impact, and that is a really, really tall order for a side that realistically has to sell players to get money back in to be able to, to be able to actually spend it. Even though their owners, the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Saudi Arabia, is one of the richest companies in the world. So that's the thing. And I understand this verdict, and I'm not criticising it. I think it's a very hard thing to prove. How do you quantify how much having Etihad is worth on the shirts of Manchester City? How much is the sponsorship of the stadium worth? How do you quantify that? It's a completely unique thing. It's not like, I don't know, a car where it's a certain value for the technology that's in there. Football is such a unique game, particularly in England. It's a unique sport in that sense. How do you quantify it? And obviously the court has found that they don't do anything wrong. So let's see. This will be interesting. Very rich owners giving potentially a loophole with this, but we'll see how it kind of goes. We'll see how it goes. But what do you guys think about the verdict with the Manchester City case? Do you think it's fair? Do you agree with it? And do you think it opens potentially a can of worms for other clubs to try and do something similar in the future? Allegedly. I'm not saying Manchester City have done this, but allegedly. And the thing is, all those allegations will always be there. Even though they've been found not guilty with this, a lot of football fans will remember this. I'll remember it. Excuse me. It's not going to go away anytime soon. And those thoughts, those allegations of it are always going to be there. So let's see what happens. Let's see if it impacts the 115 charges as well. It could potentially have a bearing with that, even though this is not directly related to it. So let us know your thoughts in the comments below, guys. And we'll see you very soon for some more football news, opinion, and analysis here on thefootballchronicle.com.